Welcome to the Experience Strategy Podcast, where we talk to customers and experts about how to create products and services that feel like time well spent. And now, here are your hosts, experienced nerds, strategists, Dave Norton and Aranza Savas.
Welcome to the Experience Strategy Podcast. I'm Aranza Savas.
And I'm Dave Norton.
And today we are going to look at one of our 2023 experience strategy trends in more detail. There is a trend that you've heard us talk about quite a bit here on the show with a tendency towards companies adding value to their CX through zooming in on small groups and their needs. So what we're seeing is a trend away from focusing just on the individual needs and finding more value from a customer perspective in services and experiences that add value to their most intimate communities. We're talking friends, families, colleagues, people they share hobbies with. And one of the companies that we've been watching in this space is Clayton Homes. And so today we are joined by Michael Stanton. He's the director of retail CX for Clayton Homes. Michael, thank you so much for being here. It's always a joy to talk to you.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm excited.
So let's just start by talking about the small group you serve. So who are the small groups when it comes to buying a home, generally speaking?
Yeah, and so Clayton Homes tends to be in the affordable or attainable space. So we actually have quite a large gambit of buyers that we target and that find our product attractive and attainable for their lifestyle. And so we tend to have, honestly, a huge gambit of shoppers. And so when at least it actually makes research really interesting, because you tend to go into, say, a quantitative study or a qualitative study with that assumption that you're going to talk to an individual, that individual is going to give you their ideas about how they go about this process. But anytime that we've actually gone and sunk ourselves into the situation with our customers, they always have somebody with them, or they always have somebody close on the line when they're shopping. So that could be anything from, say a first-time home buyer. They typically are trying to find somebody with more experience that knows the home buying process and can kind of be that sage for them and help them to smooth out different expectations or ideas of what they're being told from us or from, say a realtor or whomever else they're shopping with. And that it can be interesting and tricky when somebody has purchased, say, a manufactured home a long time ago, and when the processes were completely different, the building practices were completely different from what they are today, where today we see even, our most attainable product lines are still built to a fairly high quality. And so we have to, it's interesting to watch, because you'll see sometimes folks from an older generation who have maybe even lived in a Clayton home before become really impressed and wowed by like how far things have come. Because if you think about it, we're in a unique situation where people don't come back, year after year. They're coming back decades later for their next home buying need, even if it is, for their children or for whomever else. And so that's one segment that we see quite a lot. Another one that's really interesting and has been emerging more and more is people kind of trying to hack the housing process, if that makes sense. And what I mean by that is you'll have kind of co-equal buyers that used to be primarily husband and wife, but has become more and more people of totally different situations. Like we've seen brothers and sisters want to do this as a way of just getting an asset, and then eventually with the plan of one of them moving out. We've seen just friends from college wanting to move in together for various reasons to be able to own something, to be able to have a little bit more control over how they live their lives on the daily, how they create their spaces together. And it's created a lot of really interesting design challenges, but also shopping challenges, because then they're asking questions that we've never fielded before about, like, how would the financing process work for individuals in that situation. And it's really fun to see, like, how people are kind of coming up with really creative ways to overcome what really has become a housing crisis in America, in the sense of an affordability crisis. So that's just a couple of the really unique situations that I've noticed over the past few years.
It's so interesting. And while I want to talk about zooming in on small groups, I hear in your explanation up front right away almost all of the trends that we talked about this year in the Experience Strategy Trend Report. There is
Uncertainty is certain.
that's a huge one, right? Like that was the first one that came up. Yeah.
Sure.
And I think you're so smart to what you're identifying here in terms of these groups. And they're not dissimilar. So Dave and I do research with a wide range of categories, as you know, and we design experience strategies for a wide range of categories. And so the people you're explaining or describing here, the sage and the hacker, these people exist in our finance work, in our hospitality work, in travel, in healthcare. We hear all of these same influences across pretty much every category we talk to. And I think that is really validating and important for all of us. So no matter what category we sit in or we are trying to have an impact in, this is something we need to understand, that they are people who are bringing their mentors along, their sages, the people who've been there before, and they're trusting their opinion. And then there are the people who are like, the way we've been working isn't working. So how do we do this in a new way and redefine the paradigm for our own futures?
Well, Francis, to your point, one of the things that I think is interesting, it's really easy to see this, to think about home buying as a small group decision-making process. And maybe when you first started listening to this, you're like, oh, that's obvious because it's about the family. But immediately, Michael, we're talking about very different situations that are popping up as people try to get assets, as people try to manage their lives in very different ways, and they're trying to bring all of their resources together in a different way. And so I think, to your point, Aransas, that we need to be careful about how we think about decision making today. I think we historically have thought that, if you could get the mom, you could get the family, right? And that is so ingrained into Procter and Gamble, most manufactured goods. You need to focus on whoever it is that's the buyer. And what we're seeing is this place where it's become more democratized, more co-managed, more consensus driven. And so it's a very different place, not just for home buying, but for all kinds of different things that are happening in people's lives today. I totally agree with you, Francis, on that. And Michael, thank you for leading in like that. That was great.
Yeah, and as you're talking about that, something else that came to mind is that's really top of mind for us, and that's interesting to track with and working with you guys, is how do you digitize that decision-making process, right? Because so much else in just any consumer's life has been digitized in very smart and sophisticated ways, and we're seeing chat GTP becoming just kind of a part of how people do script writing and different things for just normal tasks. Like, people have a very high bar expectation of, if we are offering some way for you to quote unquote log in to Clayton, that it's going to do something really helpful and amazing for you. And so finding that way of how do you even, well, one, how do you even talk about that from the consumer point of view? do you create a profile that says this is my sage? Like, obviously that's not what you're going to call it, but trusted advisor, or like, what do you even call it? Then how do you give, like, do you give them a permissions list that you can turn on and off of, like, I want my dad to see this part of my profile, but I don't want him to see this other part. I don't want him to have any opinion on colors or anything. I'll let, my best friend do that, who's an interior designer or whatever. And then, on the flip side of that, how the heck do we do that internally from a administrative point of view? Do we need to do, we're in this debate right now of like, okay, how much of this are we just like, tagging in with, allowing Facebook profiles to just connect into what we're doing, or, or Google or whatever profiles, right? Versus like how much of it has to be customized, and like, oh, well, you're going to create this in our platform. And it's really interesting to talk about. It's really interesting to think about, because even when you just offer up, like, I'm just thinking about some of the research that we've done with you guys, even when you just offer up those options, people immediately start playing with it and start doing really interesting and unexpected things with it, just by saying like, what if you could do what you're already doing in real life, but in the digital world. And it's really exciting to see how creative people can be, even if you just, and then it's kind of like Legos, right? Like, I just want to put the right Legos in the box, and with no instruction manual, and just see what people do with some like prompts or something.
I love that idea. You're also reminding me of a project I worked on years ago with Weight Watchers and IDEO, in which it was called Circles. And basically, we knew that people on a weight loss journey wanted support. They needed support. They thrived with support. It's a pretty intimate topic, with a lot of sensitivities around it. And so who they get that support from was really important to them. And the types of support each person gave them is important. You can imagine your mom nagging you about eating too many pieces of candy might not be motivating. And so we asked them to get really clear about who their sort of, I'm going to not use necessarily good language here at all, but their board of directors was. So who they wanted to help them and in what ways they wanted to help them. So what were the tasks they wanted these people to perform? And essentially what they did is they designed a like logo and a tagline for each person and assigned them this job. And they said, hey, will you be on my board of directors? Will you perform this service? I want my best friend to share recipes with me. I want my mom to cheer me on no matter what happens. I want my husband to buy the groceries, whatever it is. And it got them to get in a really reflective place that was powerful and say to themselves, what do I want from these people? And then what our job was not telling them what they wanted or even creating these labels for them, but rather facilitating that conversation, which turned out to be the really hard part, which was asking for what they wanted. So it's just sort of, to me, another way of thinking about how we support small groups and how what our role is.
Sure. One of the things that you brought up is that language of circle. And if you've been in the collaborative, you know that I'm kind of promoting this idea that experienced strategists should be using more circles to try to figure out what's going on with their customers. We ran into a bit of a language issue when it came to how do we describe these small groups. Because we can't call them families because it may not necessarily be a family. Friends didn't seem right either. And so we came up with this idea of calling it your inner circle, and it worked. You can talk about people's small groups and say, do you have a small group? And they're like, what are you talking about? But as soon as you say, do you have an inner circle? What is your inner circle? Who's in your inner circle? They get it right away. So that language of who's in your circle, Francis, is really powerful, I think, that you guys haven't done. Yeah.
Yeah.
Good
And I
stuff.
think that intentionality piece of it is really interesting too. You think about, I mean, I want to say ours is one of the more complicated purchases that you'll make. And it really is. I'm sure there are some other purchases that are very complicated and rely on a more complex, interpersonal decision-making process that involves a small group. But that intentionality, right? Like where even if, I think about like some of our very best salespeople, and we're blessed with like the type of product that we have, with it being, a higher ticket item, even though it's for folks that might be the only home they ever buy, and might be the largest purchase that they ever buy. The fact that it is a decent size purchase means they can have that one-on-one engagement from our clientele, and our really best clientele do take into account that family dynamic. And they prompt a lot of that sort of naturally. Like, what do you see yourself doing in the home? What do you see your spouse doing in the home? What do you see your kids doing in the home? What do you see your friends and family doing when they come over to the home? Like prompting those sorts of things really helps to design the product, right? Because we have lots of product lines, we have lots of, you can customize things, you can change layouts, and all of that requires tons of small decisions that need to be motivated by some intentionality of some kind. So finding that way to say, like, who is in your inner circle and what say do they have could be a really great way to both like increase the speed at which you can make those sorts of decisions, because you now know, like, okay, I'm going to take this advice from over here, I'm going to put it with this one, and then you add to that whatever company's expertise on the topic, and to say, like, oh, that's what you're trying to do, here's what many of our other customers have done, and with that same situation. And it really actually builds value on the small group dynamic.
The thing you're making me think of here is, of course, what works in one area is often what's going to work in other areas. And we've all probably seen the power of a RACI chart. And what happens when we figure out who we just want opinions from, who's accountable, right? Who's responsible. And essentially, I think what you're describing is doing that as a part of the home buying process.
It's a great way of describing it.
The home
And
buying
of course,
RACI.
you can't, right? You can't start talking about these things without, if you're an experienced strategist, beginning to say, hey, there's a systemic job to be done here. We've got to figure out what the systems are. They have to be able to articulate their way of living, which is typically a systemic kind of thing. But I love this idea of a RACI chart. That's a great idea. I also am fascinated by this idea of how, like, Chat GDP and GPT, sorry about that, and
That's the next one.
and, right,
I do
that's
the
in
same
charge of the
thing
global
every time.
economy or the U.S. economy. Yeah, but how AI is going to start to affect the way these groups behave and how they make decisions. I think it's going to further democratize, further empower people. Some of the tasks that seem so tedious are going to be automated dramatically. And maybe Clayton Homes doesn't need to create their own AI system. They just need to somehow help the decision maker to use AI in the proper way and tap into these really genius systems that exist out there. So, you don't necessarily have to create everything in house, right? You can employ different tools different ways. Very cool.
Yeah. And that's what's fun about thinking about this topic, is seeing, you mentioned RACI charts, seeing the different ways in which people think about prompting that. And Dave, you mentioned circles. There are lots of different tools out there that help groups work together. I think about, I'm on our innovation team, and so we do a lot of research on just like innovation best practices and how to think innovatively. And a lot of that has to do with working with a small group as well, right? You have to use different modes at different times when you're trying to do divergent thinking, which is very much like imagining the possibilities of when you're buying a home. You have to do kind of different tasks and different different mindsets and modes when you're doing more convergent thinking toward a decision. And it would be really interesting to see
Mm.
like how these different ways of thinking about small groups, maybe in more business settings, in more like high productivity settings, can be aimed at different tasks, right? Because you guys mentioned, wellness is everywhere, I think is one of them. I forget how it's phrased, sorry.
Yeah.
But the idea that wellness is now one of these expected tasks of a business, regardless of what industry you're in, regardless of what product line you're in. And so if you can focus your small group, your inner circle on that task, what great frameworks are already out there that allow you to do that. There's so many. And so what's going to be fun, I think, as we, especially at Clayton, get some of the tech built out, some of this kind of foundational, having customer accounts and this sort of thing, but with the aim of helping customers in this way, it's gonna be fun. Again, like that whole idea of throwing the Lego box out to somebody, giving them that tool, giving them that intentionality, and just letting them run with it and see what they do.
Yeah, I love to. You were sort of nodding to this for a second, I think, with wellness. I've had the opportunity in my life to buy 2 homes over the course of my adult life, and I've made really good decisions. I have loved both of these homes deeply, and I was very slow to purchase both of them. And I believe that the reason I've been so happy with my most significant financial decision in my life, in both cases, has been because we decided, we did like big lists of pros and cons, and we really took our time. And ultimately, both cases came down to a values-based decision. And it was really about, like mapping out how our home fits into our life and the roles our home plays. So I don't know. I think it's so interesting with this category that you're in to think about the role of the home in helping a person achieve well-being and frankly, all the things that means for them. Is that something you guys currently facilitate or weave into the buying process for the family as a unit, or the small circle as a unit, the inner circle as a unit? I'm going to say all of them.
Yes, yes, and no. So yes, in the sense that we do have a great sales culture, and it's kind of one of those oxymoron things to say, right? Like, oh, everybody hates sales, but we actually have for a very long time had a great training department, a great head of sales that was very much focused on help the customer essentially get the job done. That's not the terminology that we use, but help them, meet their needs, figure out what it is that they're trying to do, and then offer solutions that match that. And so, even our salespeople are called home consultants. That may be up in the air as far as if we continue to call them that. There's lots of changes and growth and stuff happening, but that's the idea, right? We're consulting you on what it is that you want to do with your home. And of course, part of that process is diving deep on, learning about what it is you currently do, and whenever you're diving in on what it is somebody is currently doing in their home. Of course, it's going to bring their most close knit inner circle to the table in that conversation. And a lot, like I mentioned before, it's so incredibly rare to ever have an individual who is buying a home by themselves to show up even the first time by themselves. Or that was a weird way of saying that. So the only time that somebody shows up and continues to do the process by themselves is when they plan to live in the home by themselves. If anyone else is living in the home, they always come at some point in the process, and they're always there, even if it's just to listen. It's so funny sometimes. You mentioned, Dave, that it used to be, if you could find the mom, you could find that. And I've definitely observed that, but it was fun to watch at the same time, very particular things being deferred to the spouse. or to, whomever else was in that conversation. And, sometimes there is that more dominant voice of how this is going. But even the way that they're talking is things like, well, you mentioned X, Y, and Z. And so, like, even though they're the voice in that moment, they are obviously having these sorts of discussions in private and just one of them is the more vocal of the two, and they're bringing kind of the consensus to the table when talking with us and our sales folks. And sorry, I feel like I've gotten off of track of your original question.
No.
But yes,
super
we do
interesting.
that.
No,
I'm
I
into
think
it.
I think you're onto something. Yeah, I mean that's that whole democratization type thing where we try to use better communication patterns and to share in the way that we make decisions. It's been interesting to me to watch as Netflix has been challenged to figure out a way to grow. They are pulling back on allowing people to use their accounts outside of the home, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and we can see that there's a real financial reason and a logical reason to do that to a large degree. But think about the family dynamic or the friend dynamic. It's like, hey guys, I've been paying for this the entire time, and now I'm going to have to take away your access, And everybody's like, no, you can't do that. Sorry, we've got to do that, right? So that's going on. Where companies are having to make really interesting choices about everything from whether or not Southwest is going to offer companion,
Passes.
what do they call it? The companion
Passes.
passes, right? Which has historically been a great thing for them. Should they keep doing it? Or should they approach the couple in a different way or the family in a different way? I think there's a lot that's going on that maybe we're not paying attention to because we're so focused on who is the individual that we're trying to support. And we do need to support individuals, but we need to understand that individuals work within a group more and more.
They exist in
And if we can
relation
understand
to
the group,
others for the most.
yeah,
Yep.
yeah.
Yep.
And when we understand that, then we actually empower the individual more.
I wonder if
Frankly.
Netflix did a test from a pricing standpoint to see if they actually returned higher investment by creating less friction for those awkward conversations. So I can imagine, I've talked to a lot of people recently. MailChimp just made a decision to change their pricing structure. And so I've talked to a lot of people who have had to figure out now how to leave MailChimp on a whim because they don't want to comply with this new pricing structure that's been thrust upon them. And I think even my 12-year-old, who is not a purchaser of anything, was talking about the Netflix decision and how strange it is and how much curiosity she has about what will happen and whether Netflix will now no longer have any good programming because everybody will leave Netflix. So, I mean, if a 12-year-old is asking these questions, and I'll admit she is my 12-year-old, but if a 12-year-old is asking this, there are a lot of people asking this. And so how many parents and grandparents are there out there and friends, as you said, who've been paying for everybody's subscriptions who would rather just pay more and not have to worry about the friction of the conversation and the dramatics of taking something away, right? Because Netflix is taking away they are refusing to support that service any longer. And I just wonder, I mean, it'd be really interesting during the upgrade period. And I'm not the one who pays our Netflix bill, so I haven't seen it, but I'm going to go dig around now to see if they're giving any options to people to upgrade in different ways so that they will stick with them in service of the small group. Be really interesting for us to try.
Yeah, I frankly think Netflix's biggest challenge is that Disney is not allowing for outside the home usage, and so they're like getting killed from a stock standpoint because because Disney has this different model. So yeah, it will be really interesting.
There's a lot of differences there, but yes.
Yeah.
Their pricing model, I mean, but
Right.
also their marketing model is so different. Disney owns such a wide range of media companies, so they are getting free advertising
Mm.
all day long. If you
Yeah.
watch ABC News, you will see a bias toward Disney stories. There is a there is a reason Disney is doing so well, but we'll talk about that on another episode. Um,
Right.
all right, Michael,
Yeah.
we're getting close to the end of our time here. What else should we be looking at from the perspective of better supporting inner circles based on what you've seen and what you're learning at Clayton?
Yeah, I think actually it I, it popped into focus when you said it, and it said it so much more succinctly than what I had been thinking about before. But that idea that if you can basically help people identify their values and make decisions that are value driven. You mentioned your home and how it ultimately boiled down to a value driven decision. And I was like, wow, that is exactly what we have been trying to do. I just had never put it into those words before. And I think that really is the power of it because a home is an emotional purchase. It is also a very foundational purchase. It affects so much of your life. It affects so much of what you'll be doing for years and years to come. I mean, at least two, if you're trying to do it in that sort of respect, right? Um, and so when you think about like, man, this is something I'm going to be doing for a long time, and if all you're doing it is based on the things that like the current technology, the current
Mhm.
kind of buying enablers out there do, which is how many bedrooms, how many bathrooms do you want? It's like you're not making a great decision. So I think one of the key things is going to be, shifting um, shifting thought away from like you guys have mentioned before too, that people don't necessarily care about our values. They care whether or not we're going to support theirs, right? They care
Mhm.
whether or not we're going to support their mission, their values, and whether or not purchasing from us is going to enable those things that they really care about. So that's going to be interesting because because a small group is made up of individuals, there's going to be certain kind of like concentric circles, right? Where there are values that don't align in this particular small group, but there's going to be a few core ones that really do. So I think identifying those and finding ways to support those, both like through reflection of the customer themselves, as well as the tools that we provide that kind of drive decision making. Maybe think about that as the center of gravity for an orbit of many other things. I think that's going to be the key. That's just a Michael hot take. I don't know that that's a Clayton hot
All
take.
right, can I give you a hot take
But
back? All right,
sure.
here's my hot take back. I want to do my all-time favorite thing with you guys, which is so my favorite thing to do in my career is to work with big companies that have a lot of influence on customers' experiences and help them integrate transformational coaching into the experience, both from a values based perspective, but also from a behavior change perspective. And I think if your amazing sales team had coaching skill sets to support them in these conversations, I would gamble. I would be willing literally to place a bet that it would have an outcome on customer satisfaction, referral,
Mm.
and repeat customers.
Yeah, I can
So,
see it.
yeah. I mean, it's just to me like talk about transformational for a category. I know some people who've integrated coaching and real estate and it's been profound. And I think doing it through a system that you guys already have, where you have this deep understanding of the end-to-end home buying experience and integrating coaching in through that journey, I can't even. Okay, so there's my hot take. We'll continue the conversation, but
Mm.
uh,
Well, well, thankfully, my boss is both the in charge of our division's customer experience as well as our team member experience and training. So I can definitely float that one out and see what we can do, because I agree that's a great idea.
Awesome. So let's recap before we keep looking forward, but I'm excited about continuing that conversation. So I just took some notes as we were talking of my big key takeaways in here. Number one, you've seen a shift from the family as the inner circle to really the hackers and the sages. And the hackers were using as shorthand for the people who are buying with their siblings and their BFFs and other people with whom they can make the home buying experience more accessible as an investment in themselves. And the realization that we are seeing these roles and these shifts happen across all categories. Secondarily, this idea that Dave really double clicked on, which was decision making being more democratized and as you built, and more digitized and the challenges therein. Finally, this idea of the home buying racy and really understanding the roles and the accountability of each person within the inner circle in the home buying process, the potential for values-based enablement. I sort of in my own mind thought about it as shifting from who I am buying for who I am now versus buying for who I want to become. Any other key takeaways from you guys that I should be capturing?
I love those. No, I think you hit all of the right things. I would just restate again, companies that are looking to further develop their relationship with individuals should be looking at those individuals as part of a group, a small group, and support that small group. These two things don't work against each other. You can further individualize your experience by understanding that individual's relationships.
100.
Drop the mic.
Drop that mic. Please don't,
Drop
literally,
the
because
mic.
it would be really uncomfortable in my ears. Michael, thank you so much for joining us. It's such an interesting space you're in. And you guys have the history and the authority to radically rethink something that is so important to people's happiness and to their well-being. And I'm so grateful to get to watch the investment and the care you and your team show for your customers' experience. It's really inspiring to work with such innovative and thoughtful partners. To all of you listening, I hope you will ask the big mic drop question that Dave just posed for yourselves and consider who your individuals are influenced by and influencing. Who is factoring into their decision-making process, but also their satisfaction framing process, because they are not alone. They are part of a system. They are part of a team. They are part of a crew. And if you don't understand that, you are going to miss some big opportunities to provide value. Thank you for listening. Please check out the Experience Strategy Trend Report on our website, stonemantle.co. You'll see in there not just a case study on Clayton Homes, but lots of other companies that are leading the way in understanding this and can hopefully provide you some greater inspiration as you consider what it means for you. Thank you for listening.
Thank you for listening to the Experience Strategy Podcast. If you're having fun nerding out with us, please follow and share wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Find more episodes and continue the conversation with us at experiencestrategypodcast.com.